Don't miss the 2021 SCOLD Conference from March 18th to the 20th in Atlanta, Georgia. See y'all there. Have you ever wondered how to incorporate debates into your language classroom? Welcome to Agree to Disagree, from discussion to debate. In our presentation, we will discover some tips and tricks for teaching novice all the way to advanced students how to engage in civil discourse. We will also see how to lead students from a structured discussion all the way to an open debate. My name is Lisa Worthington-Groce, and I am a National Board Certified Teacher. I have been teaching for over 17 years, and the last 14 of those have been spent at Northwest Guilford High School in Greensboro, North Carolina. I primarily teach German, but am also certified to teach French as well. So we will be using a Padlet together today during our asynchronous session. Anytime we reach a point in the presentation where you see this Padlet symbol, it'll be your opportunity to give feedback or to pose questions. So the way to access our group Padlet is to simply hover your cell phone camera over the QR code and it will take you straight there, or you can simply type in the link provided. And let's go ahead and take a look together now at what you'll find at our group Padlet. Our group Padlet is a way for us to collaborate even though we might not be together in person. So here you'll find different sections of our presentation today, and I have already plugged in a few of my own tips from the presentation, but if you would like to add on, you simply click on the little plus and it will allow you to add a post to the column. If you scroll over to your right, you'll see that there is a question and answer at the end. So you are welcome to use that to pose questions of me or of other participants. And then you can simply write comments. You can add links to the posts. There's lots of flexibility in how we use this board together. We know that communication arises out of a need to share ideas or exchange information, or of course negotiate meaning. So if our goal is to get them talking, one of the first questions we need to ask is, how do we spark students' curiosity? What are going to be the topics and themes that are going to excite and motivate them and really engage the young people with whom we work? We like to look at open-ended, relevant questions. And of course, always at the forefront should be intercultural communication. How do the discussions that we have with our students and that they have with each other really build that foundation for a better understanding of ourselves and others? To reach our goal today of getting our students discussing and debating, we've got a teacher action plan. So first, we're going to look at strategies for finding student-centered, relevant, interesting topics. Next, we're going to take a look at how we can provide level-appropriate scaffolding and support to enable our students all the way from novice low and novice mid to intermediate and possibly even advanced to have these discussions on a variety of topics. And finally, we'll discuss a few ways to create activities that really encourage communication. How do we find topics that truly motivate and engage our students? One place that I like to find topics of current interest, not only to our students, but to those living in the target culture, is to find magazines. Often these are geared towards young people. For German, one of my favorites is Dein Spiegel, and you can look for articles and letters and all sorts of fun activities that really hit on the cultural zeitgeist of the present era. Another good place to find topics are through TV shows from the target culture. For example, The picture that you see is the question of e-sport. Is that gaming, or is that sport, or is that something in the middle? And given that I teach a lot of gamers, this was a topic I found that really resonated with them. But I think the best way of finding topics that will interest and excite the students is to go to the students themselves. And that can be done through student surveys. So let's take a look at a couple of different methods of gathering this information from those that we teach. One way of doing student surveys is the traditional format of having students interview each other and collect information, whether through a human bingo or a set of questions that they've come up with. I'll have them do little write-ups where they kind of explain the findings of their results, and that gives me a sense of what sorts of interests they have to guide our future discussions. Obviously, in this day and age, face-to-face surveys aren't necessarily always going to be feasible. So there are a number of online tools that will allow you to accomplish the same goal. I've used a couple of different sites for gathering information from students about their interests. These include Google Forms and Mentimeter, not sure about pronunciation there, and Socrative. So let's look at a couple of different ways I've gathered information using these online tools. With Google Forms, this is where I wanted to kind of find out from the learners what topics might interest them in the future. So you can see it's given me a good bar graph, and I can really see some of those things that interest the majority. For example, almost 66% of my students want to talk about jobs and careers. I do teach high school, so especially those 11th and 12th graders are already looking at what comes next. 53% want current events. So again, that's where these sources like TV shows and magazines from the target culture are really going to come in and help us zero in on what the current events are in the target culture, but also in our own local community, state, or even nationally. This was a survey that I did on art. So the students had covered a little bit of street art and graffiti, and then we began to look at more classical art, and I wanted to get a sense of which artists and which genres and which type of art really appealed to them. So this showed me right away that the students were very much into Gustav Klimt and Franz Marc. So just a really quick snapshot. And I think one of my personal favorite for debate topics is my Socrative surveys. So this was a unit that I had done with novice learners on animals. And the first question that I posed to the students was, what do you think about animals in the circus? And if you look at the results here, you'll notice that 100% of my students surveyed thought that was a bad idea. So essentially what this tells me is this is not going to be the best topic for debate, since everybody's going to agree. That doesn't really make for a very fruitful discussion. However, when I changed the question to, are zoos a good or bad idea for animals, you'll notice that the opinions were split almost right down the middle. 42% of my students thought zoos were a good idea for animals, and 58% thought they were not a great idea. So this shows me this would be a topic that we could really talk about, since students really fall on both sides of the issue. And in fact, my novice level students did talk about this and debate this, and we're talking novice mid. So in just a little bit, you're going to find out how they accomplished what is a relatively sophisticated topic already at the novice level. We're getting there. This is just a sample list of some of the topics that my students have or will be discussing in the future. So what I'd like to do now is have you all contribute what are some topics that have really resonated with your students, or topics that you think might be interesting in this day and age to discuss. You've got that little Padlet symbol, so go ahead and do your thing, pull up the Padlet and contribute. So next we're going to take a look at ways in which we can support those learners who are attempting to really express themselves in another language on topics that sometimes might feel even a little bit beyond what they think they're capable of discussing. So our job is to then step in and give them that scaffolding and make this a reality that they can really discuss and debate in the target language. So one of the most important things early on is to create that community where students are going to feel comfortable talking about what sometimes could be controversial topics with each other. So it's always a good idea to, they say they don't like them, but I think they really do. Start with a few icebreakers. I sometimes will do an icebreaker where they move together with others with whom they share something in common. Because at first glance, you can't always see on the surface level what the common link is. I do start with things like hair color, eye color. That's always fun. I had a student years ago who had 2 different colors of eyes. So how did she navigate which group to join? And just move to fun topics where they can find students with whom they share similar interests. Brain breaks are another really fun way to get the kids a little bit outside of the daily grind and interacting. Cooperative learning in general, so activities where they really work together towards a common goal and are there to support each other. All of those sorts of things are going to build the community. And perhaps most important is to set discussion norms very early on, so students have very concrete expectations for how a conversation should look and also how it should not look. So right from the beginning with my early novice learners, I make it very clear that you are permitted to agree and disagree, and I will give you the expressions to do so. You can criticize an idea of another student if you are able to defend that with support, but you cannot belittle a person's identity. And we look at what sorts of phrases would be involved to avoid and to use. So it's a good idea to have some phrases that students can always access, and I've seen this done in a lot of different ways. Some teachers will have the phrases taped to the desks. In some classrooms, the students will have a handout that they pull out every day or that they have in the front cover of their binder. In my classroom, before I had to empty it out at the end of this school year, so that the building could be deep cleaned, I had these phrases posted. So in blue on the left, you have various phrases for agreeing. And they're right at the front of the classroom where students can always look up and refer, and in orange on the right, phrases for disagreeing. So give them those short memorized phrases that they can easily access to always incorporate as needed in the discussion. These are those same phrases that we just saw posted on my wall, but in English. They, in particular, like the German phrase Quatsch, which means nonsense, and we look at some other fun English equivalents like poppycock or hogwash. So they get into those little dialect phrases in the target language as well. Another important component to supporting your novice learners is to give them those sentence starters and they fill in the rest. So early on, we look at just giving our opinion on a variety of topics, short and sweet. As their language skills grow, we will start adding support. So phrases like because and therefore, and a little bit later on, for this reason, so that by the time they reach the intermediate, these sentence starter, these phrases are automatic for the students. They've been using them from the very beginning, and they've had that repetition because we use them on a daily basis. How to contrast. So sometimes there will be situations where you agree, yes, that's true, however, and you're going to then bring forward the counter argument. And then ways to add additional information. For example, also, as well, furthermore. So again, that they have easy access to these phrases that you want them to use again and again to get their opinions across. The surveys that we do serve a couple of different purposes. We've already seen how you can use surveys to gather information about student interests or about where they fall on a particular issue, but they can also be used as support to give students the vocabulary and the phrases that they'll need when they are discussing. So again, with my novice learners, we had looked at the topic of zoos, and this question asks, in your opinion, what is the best reason to have zoos? And you will see answer choice C, 0% of my students think that the best reason is because animals have a good life in zoos. 0% said there's no good reason for zoos. Everybody thought, yeah, maybe zoos have some positives and some advantages. The majority, 54%, like the fact that children learn about animals, so the educational purpose. And my novice learners are not necessarily going to know the German word for education. Germans are famous for those compound nouns. So we've got this nice simple phrase that they can steal from the teacher and from the survey. Children learn about animals. You'll see 23% like that it's fun for families, and 23% like that the zoo doctors, aka the veterinarians, help the animals. So these nice simple phrases that are very manageable for my novice learners to comprehend and that they can then use in our later discussion. Another good way to support, especially as students' proficiency levels advance to the intermediate level, is to provide students with the texts and videos where they can find the arguments. So they're not having to come up with the language all by themselves. Again, one way I like to do that is through videos from the target culture. So here you'll see a page. I provided the link to my students about plastic and the environment. So plastic versus paper bags, the effect of plastic on water and the ocean. And then you see an article from a magazine where two different people go up against each other for and against forbidding single-use plastic bottles. So again, this gives those more advanced learners the support that they need in terms of more sophisticated language that they could then reuse some of those ideas and some of that wording in the discussion that we have together. Finally, once my students have moved up to the higher proficiency levels, so I use this a lot for my AP students, from the beginning they've been using these resources. So as their media literacy grows, I will start requiring them to find and choose and cite the sources that they've found as they're making their arguments. A good place to direct them, a lot of target cultures will have search engines geared directly towards children and young people. So this might be a good option for the learners to find level appropriate sources. And if you look at educational resources for native speaking youth, you will often find resources that you can guide your learners towards. We'll finish today by looking at a few activities that you can incorporate from novice to intermediate level to get those students discussing and debating. So very early on, one of the games that I like to play with early language learners is Four Corners. So within the classroom, you can put a phrase such as "my favorite subject is," and they will go to the corner of the classroom that fits their response. The nice thing is the phrase is there for them, so they're essentially working on interpretive reading skills, but then using that to produce the language. You can incorporate a little bit of grammar there so that when a group stands together in chorus, they switch the "my favorite" to "our favorite." So a good way to kind of introduce them to different forms. Students who don't fall in any of the four corners, I often let gather in the middle of the room. You can take that one level higher by having them not just express the opinion, but also support it. So I think a lot of young people would be in agreement that they like their cell phones and their smartphones. Now they get to pick a reason why. So this is really practicing those phrases that we'll be using to support opinions. And finally, as students move up into more advanced proficiency, the question becomes a little more open-ended in terms of giving the reason. So they've chosen where they'd like to travel to. The group will brainstorm together all of the reasons why their particular location is the best. And after they've kind of hashed out those reasons together, they will announce to the class, we would like to travel out of the country because we can meet people from around the world. They can also discuss some of the disadvantages of the others, and so this turns into one of our first informal debates. Group B says we would like to travel to the mountains because you can have lots of fun skiing and hiking. And the students in D at the beach will say, that's true that you can go hiking, but it's much too cold at the mountains. At the beach, it's warm and sunny. And then group B comes back with, yes, but you get sunburned. So we have that early attempt at debating. I normally use this for my level 2 students in second semester, that novice high where they're getting ready to move on. So let's look at a few things to really build these skills from novice to intermediate. Here you can see the ways that I differentiate activities from the early novice learners all the way up to the intermediate learners. And you'll see that there's a gradually increased responsibility for the students in creating their own structures and locating their arguments as they move up in proficiency levels. So for our novice debaters, I will set my classroom in the following format, where I would have 6 to 8 teams, typically between 2 and 4 students per team. And at first, they're just working together against their team, that cooperative learning. A little bit later on, they don't know this initially, but the class will be divided into half with the team on one side for a topic and the team on the other side against a topic. So this is the setup. I've got arguments that perhaps my upper level students have created in simple language, or that I've already heard students write or seen students write. And then I will create a little batch of cards for each of my 6 to 8 teams. Then they will do the following. So this is what the finished product should look like for each of the teams in the novice level groupings. They should have a list of reasons for keeping animals at the zoo and against keeping animals at the zoo. And I made it really easy on myself to check each group quickly. All of the for reasons are odd numbers and all of the against reasons are even. Fortunately, none of the students picked up on that, but you can't use that every time. Once they have those reasons laid out, the debate can begin. So this is where you announce to the class that one side will be for and one side will be against. This is what a debate would sound like. So a student from the pro side would shout out, "It's fun for families." And using those disagreeing statements that are posted, someone from the other side of the classroom would say, "That's true, but it's not fun for the animals." Another student on that same team would say, "I agree with you, and the animals have too much stress." Then we're back to the pro side and the debate proceeds, going back and forth, supporting your own team and using those expressions that are posted. Again, all the arguments are right there for the students to read. Moving up in the next level, with my level 2 students who are novice high, almost ready to move into intermediate, we do what I think of as a structured debate. So one of the early debates is life in the city versus life in the country. I happen to teach at a school at which half of the students live in a very rural environment and the other half live in a fairly urban area. So this topic works well. The students know in advance which side they'll be representing, and they work together in a small team to come up with lots of different arguments. So again, you've got the cooperative learning. They plan their arguments in advance, and they trade their argument with their opponent. So it's really very structured, very guided. We've learned phrases and grammar terms. You'll see all these comparative and superlative forms that are underlined. And so round 1 of the structured debate, city makes the argument, country gives a counter, city gives a rebuttal, and then it goes to open discussion, at which point the real interactive discussion begins and kids can speak a little bit more freely. Round 2 would operate the same way, but this time country gets the first word, city counters, rebuttal, and then we go to open debate. So this, the kids are coming up with the phrases themselves, but it's a little more structured. They're not having to necessarily come up with all of the arguments right off the top of their head during the debate. However, by the time students reach that intermediate level, we want them to start speaking in longer sentences and piecing those together. So here you can see the setup. Students do have their notes. They do have phrases if needed. They may have gathered some arguments in advance, but they're not simply reading. They really are able to start creating off the top of their heads. Finally, kids at the most advanced level will participate in a Socratic seminar. So you throw a few questions out to the group. You set up kind of a fishbowl technique, and important is that you are taking part in the discussion, that you're really interacting with the others. I'll often put the students in a circle for this. They refer back to the texts that we may have read in class. They bring other speakers into the conversation. So if they notice someone hasn't really gotten a chance to express themselves, they could say, "Hey, Bob, what do you think about this?" They make comparisons in what they hear. And you notice that they can also lose points for doing things they shouldn't be doing, such as being disrespectful. But again, those guidelines have been set up very early. You can do a little pre-activity of advantages, disadvantages that you see there on the board, and you can keep that up for the kids to refer back to if needed for someone who needs that extra support. So go to the Padlet, give us your activity ideas. Can't wait to hear them. I'd like to thank you for taking part in our Agree to Disagree presentation brought to you by the National Foreign Language Center 2020 Virtual Summit. I look forward to seeing your ideas on the Padlet. Auf Wiedersehen.